I really want to talk to Jonathan in Georgia. Jonathan, you're live with Eric and V.
Hello.
Hey, what would you like to talk about? We're doing well, yeah?
You're doing good.
Yeah.
Yeah, having a good Sunday out there in Austin. Sorry, it's rainy. It's beautiful in Georgia, nice and sunny.
I prefer
we like the rain.
Yeah.
It's sunny way too far.
I mean, yeah, the rain can be good, right?
Makes things grow. All right,
What's up?
Yes, growth is the most important thing. So, basically, I got introduced to your show from a friend several months back. You know, he is somebody who is wavering on his faith. You know, he's not necessarily a believer, but he hasn't necessarily taken anything to being an atheist as well. But I would probably classify him more on the atheistic aspect than on the belief aspect.
Okay.
You know, if it wasn't a binary thing, would you say that they're questioning?
I'm sorry, are they questioning it? Yeah, I think they're questioning it.
Okay.
I think the main reason why he questions his non-belief is because of the experiences that he's seen in my life with my belief. And so it's hard for him to make understanding of it with the things that happen in my life as a believer and the things that have happened through me to him as well. So it's definitely something where, you know, he's still not a believer. I'm not telling you he's changed or converted because of me, but it definitely is harder for him to to stand firm on his non-belief with the things that kind of happen consistently around me and through him as well.
You know, Jonathan, there's some phrasing in there that I think is really interesting, and I'd love to kind of just pick at just a little bit. So when you say stand firm in non-belief, I feel like that is I think that's kind of emblematic of a kind of thinking that I had when I was a Christian that I don't have anymore. And that is that I don't value, and I don't think V values, standing firm in a belief in spite of evidence. We want to believe true things and you know, just shuffle out false things and try and have as clear of an understanding of the world around us as possible. And so I would encourage, especially to your friend, if that's what they're doing, to follow the evidence where it leads, but not to dig in despite what evidence you're evaluating. Do you think that you should be standing firm in your Christian belief?
Well, I mean, you said without the evidence, right? And
well, I'm saying despite evidence. So if I were to bring you evidence that contradicts your view of the world, do you think it is better to say, I don't care about your evidence, I'm just going to believe what I want to believe? Or do you think it is better to evaluate the evidence and to shift your view so that it is more in line with reality?
Well, yes, of course. I think that if evidence is presented to you, you should definitely go with the evidence that is presented to align yourself with what you believe. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, it does come down to a belief in the evidence that you see. So despite on how much evidence you have, whether it's substantial or not, people can make beliefs on slight substantiality, and people can make beliefs off of more evidence as well.
Agreed. And there's good evidence and bad evidence, right?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that there's good and bad evidence because.
So let's say I'm investigating a murder and I look into my alphabet soup and it says Jonathan, and I think, okay, that's evidence for Jonathan being the murderer. Do you think I would consider that bad evidence, right?
Well, honestly, I wouldn't consider that evidence at all because it's just my name in alphabet soup.
So when it comes to evidence, there is good evidence and bad evidence. There are things that will turn out to support a case, and there are things that won't, and something that wouldn't support that case would be bad evidence. That's where I'm going. I just went as extreme as I could, but hopefully you understand.
I understand that, but Yeah, I understand that, but then I would just say then that's not evidence, right? Because that's like saying a cat walked past me, therefore V's a witch. I mean, that has no correlation, you know? And no offense, V, I'm not saying you're a witch or anything.
You can actually say that. That's fine with me.
Go ahead.
I think
but that's what I'm saying.
I think it's interesting, this discussion, because some people, like, again, it comes down to the definition, right? We can definitely say that we can just hold the word evidence to mean good evidence and evidence that is convincing and backed up. And that's definitely one way to do it. But a lot of people have different definitions of evidence. And so if you say, well, I have evidence of this, someone might think, oh, well, you know, it's a cat crossed your path and V's a witch, and that's your evidence.
Well, actually, where I was going was, Jonathan, if you wouldn't say that that's evidence at all, then would I be okay in saying that your lived experience, the experience that you're reporting that you may not have physical, tangible proof of, isn't evidence?
Well, physical,
because the thought is the assumption is that I want to evaluate your evidence and find out whether it's evidence or not. Then, if that's the case.
Well, I would say that not all evidence is tangible. You know, we do use anecdotal evidence, even though it may be weak in the court of law, but it also can substantiate other things that could help give the conclusion that something happened.
Okay, so what if an angel comes to you in a dream and reported to you what was going to happen in the future, and each of those things reported came true? Would that be evidence for God?
Well, that doesn't necessarily give evidence for God. That just gives evidence for the dream and the angel.
That's true. Okay, what about
angel who came?
What about miracle healing? If you prayed for someone who was in cancer, had cancer, and that cancer went into remission, would you consider that to be evidence for God?
Not necessarily as well, because a prayer by, I guess, our standards, not necessarily saying that I have the power of God to cause prayers to come true. So, you know, it's almost with the instinct as if I pray, it doesn't necessarily mean that my prayer will be answered or that I have the power to influence. And I mean, I guess we could say that because, you know, we saw all the false prophets that made all the predictions about Donald Trump winning the election. And, you know, they prayed and they said that those things happened, or that they were given revelation that those things happened. But, you know, it says in the scripture that seize every thought captive. So if I'm seizing every thought captive, whether it's from God or from the devil, and I know these are concepts that you don't necessarily contort to, but if I have a thought, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was from God, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it was from the devil. And that's why we have to evaluate every thought that comes to us anyway, because a lot of things that come to us aren't necessarily from a good place. And I know you've had these experiences. I've had these experiences where you'll be sitting in a room, maybe reading a book, and the next thing you know, an evil thought passes your way. And you're like, where did that even come from? Right? So I
enjoy my evil thoughts, honestly. Jonathan, I'm curious. Can I stop you right there for a minute? Because I think we might be going a little bit on a tangent and bringing in some concepts that we haven't really talked about yet. So I want to go back to what constitutes good evidence. You used a very good example of a black cat crossing your path, therefore X, right? What about that is bad evidence or not good evidence?
Well, I mean, can we try to classify it as weak and strong? Because
Fair.
Sure.
Absolutely. What makes a cat crossing your path meaning something weak evidence?
Weak? Well, it would have to have, in order for it to be strong evidence, it would have to have correlation to the thing that you're trying to prove. And just because a cat crosses my path, it doesn't necessarily have any correlation to prove the claim that I'm making. So that's why I would say it would be weak. Because I wouldn't say it's bad, because that would be saying that I'm making a subjective claim about the evidence. So I could use that it's weak evidence because, okay, just because it's a cat and it's black and it crossed my path, how did I come to the determination that this is the result of the claim that I'm making.
Right. There's a gap between the evidence and the claim, right? There's something happened and then I make a leap and this is the conclusion, right? There can't be that gap if it's going to be strong evidence.
Right. Now, the evidence could get stronger but I mean, I know this is a realistic example, but say the cat crosses my path. Every time the cat crosses my path, V has a storm cloud that goes over her head. Every time the cat crosses the path, the storm cloud's over her head and her eyes turn white. Like I said, this is obviously not truthful, but...
I mean, I'm liking this version of myself. I'm not going to lie. My question for you, though, is, okay, that's cool. That's replicable experiments, right? You can experiment. You can see how many times after a cat crosses my path does V's eyes turn white. And then you can make that correlation. And then you won't know for sure, but you'll be able to say more directly, hey, it's more likely that this will happen based on past experience. So my question is, you seem to have a really good grasp of what makes evidence strong. It needs to be directly correlated to the claim, and there can't be that gap in reasoning. And also, it has to be replicable, right? You have to be able to say, this has happened this number of times, and this is the result. So where does this come into your experiences, especially the ones that you're talking about with your friend? Where is that correlation there?
Well, I could use my friend. I mean, obviously, my experiences don't necessarily give much weight to you, V, and for you, Eric, as well, because it's my experience. So,
but here's the thing. Strong evidence will convince someone regardless of whether or not they share that experience. So if you told me a cat crosses my path every time and then this person turns into a witch, I'd be like, well, that's not my experience. Show me. And if you could show me that and demonstrate that that happened every time, I would be 100% willing to believe you, even if I myself did not have a cat cross my path.
Most of the way there.
And that is great to make an example for stuff that are replicable. But when it comes to the idea of God, I don't have the power over God to make things happen. So for the experiences that kind of build onto the stronger case for God, especially for my friend, it would have to be things that kind of occurred naturally for him. And also through me. So it would be one thing if I obviously had the power over God to be like, hey, God, show my friend this, and this will happen every single time. But I don't have that experience. The only thing that he can evaluate it is off of multiple things that happen that are, let's say, unexplained, that also leads towards the conclusion based off of stronger or weaker evidence off the claim that I've made. And so I can just give examples. Like, I know Eric used miracle healing, right? My friend is not a believer.
And just really quickly, I just want to use this as a quick opportunity to give people who are watching a little more language in being able to discuss this. So something that does not logically follow from the premise is a non sequitur. And so when you're giving something that just does not make sense, right? The alphabet soup example, right? That'd be a non sequitur. And then the other piece that y'all were talking about that I think would be really good for people to have is post hoc ergo propter hoc. And that is misattributing the cause of something. So let's say...
I wore my lucky socks and then it rained.
Yeah.
It rained because I wore my lucky socks.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
But Eric, can I ask you something?
Sure.
Eric, may I ask you something?
Yeah, of course.
Do you not say that God can be illogical?
Well, it depends on your definition of God. I hate to be that guy, but the thing is I think that my concept of what a God is, I'm sorry? What I was going to say was, I think my concept of a God, if I were to superimpose that onto you, I'd be strawmanning you. And so we usually try and limit our own definitions of a God so that we can listen to and engage with people who call in. So what's your definition of that God?
Well, I mean, I do believe in the Judeo-Christian God, but for the example of the conversation, let's just use the example as the highest moral thing that you can conceive. So,
Jean-Luc Picard.
In my example, I would say, in my example, for my highest moral thing that I could conceive, that would probably be Jesus Christ. Because at least from the scriptures, it says that he was a sinless man who healed many people, cured the blind, and did all these different miracles. And I mean, to at least my knowledge and through my studies, I have never really found anything that has kind of refuted the fact that he was.
Well,
He didn't tell slaves to, like, masters to free their slaves or talk about rape as being bad. Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. And I don't want to get onto this tangent because we could, and we all know where it goes, and we all know how it ends because this is Talk Heathen. My issue with this line of conversation is that it doesn't matter to me whether or not God is illogical or logical. That doesn't matter. That's a non-issue. For me, I can only conceive of things that follow logic. I am a logical being, not because I'm higher or smartest, because I function in a world that is governed by the laws of logic. So I can only access information that is presented in a logical way, or else I cannot comprehend it. So if God is indeed real and illogical, I cannot draw any conclusions about that God because it falls outside of the realm of my ability to comprehend things. So if God is illogical, God has taken himself out of the equation of what can be talked about, what can be proven in a logical universe.
Okay, so V, let me ask you something. From my understanding of what you're saying, you only comprehend things that are logical. Would that mean that maybe you should explore comprehending things that are also illogical?
How would you accurately comprehend something that is illogical?
Well, something that's illogical is something that you cannot ground on logical basis. So,
Like what? Give me an example that isn't God.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I would love an example of that, but one that isn't God, because that's the claim we're disputing here. So give me another example of something that is illogical and can be discussed positively.
Okay, so like I said, the only thing I can give you is experiences based off of, I guess, my own experience that would, to you, seem illogical. And also maybe to me it would be illogical, but it doesn't invalidate the fact that the experience happened.
No, it certainly doesn't. But I think we might be using illogical in different ways, right? There's the colloquial version of logical. Oh, that's illogical. That doesn't make sense to me immediately. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. There are certainly things that we experience that we do not rationally comprehend correctly. I'm not disputing that at all. I've had them. You've had them. We've all had experiences we can't explain, but we know happened. What I'm talking about are logical contradictions, right? Things that actually cannot be, like the law of the excluded middle. Mm-hmm. What are the other ones? The law of non-contradiction, the law of
so non-contradiction, excluded middle, and identity.
And identity, right? So like A cannot be B. That is not possible.
Or A cannot be not A.
Not A.
I agree with you. I do not believe that God is a logical contradiction. So, I mean, I guess I've seen y'all use the example on the show before where can God make a rock so heavy he couldn't lift it? Wouldn't that be a logical contradiction if God is all powerful? So that's what I mean by I don't believe that God is logically contradictory. You know, like he can't make a square circle. You know, like
well, that's just a definitional puzzle. But okay, so what do you mean when you say illogical? Because when I say illogical, I mean in contradiction with the laws of logic, which cannot be something I comprehend in a positive, useful way. So what do you mean when you say illogical?
Use it that way. I wouldn't use it that way because, at least I'm not using it that way because I don't think there is anything that you can use that is contradictory to the laws of logic. Like,
right, I agree.
About God, I don't think that. So I mean, I'm not using it as an example to say that this is illogical and it contradicts the laws of logic. Like,
Okay, you said before, Eric, do you think that God is illogical or can be illogical? What did you mean when you used illogical in that way? Because that's how I interpreted it, and it sounds like that's not what you meant.
No, that's not what I meant. What I meant by illogical, I meant like used in a way in which you cannot physically or naturally explain.
Okay, so
That be
God.
definition.
Okay, that's not illogical, but that makes more sense in terms of the conversation.
That really kind of is vibing God at the gaps.
Yeah, a little bit. That's the problem we run into there.
Yeah, is wherever there's a thing you don't understand or can't explain or are having trouble explaining, then it's God.
But it would only be a gap if you didn't have weak or strong evidence that pointed to God. So, because I mean, you started up the conversation about there is no evidence, I guess, for God. And
well, I don't think we ever said that. We were discussing the difference between weak and strong evidence.
Yeah, and ultimately what it was doing is it was setting up a way for you to share the evidence that you have so that we can evaluate whether or not it's weak or strong evidence and why you think it may be strong evidence.
Would you like to hear an example of weak or strong evidence that has experience with my friend?
Sure. And I'm sure you watched the show, so kind of the pacing and all of that. So
it's possible.
Perfect. Go for it.
Okay. So as short as possible, my friend, non-believer, was having chest pains one day, had been experiencing it for several months. He works at a tire shop. One day a lady came in and noticed him and asked if there was something wrong with his chest. He said, "How would you know that?" She just said, "I could feel something about you." She walked up to him, put her hands on his chest, prayed in Hebrew, and then the pain was gone. And so I would say that is something that's illogical because it's nothing that he can naturally or physically explain. The pain did subside once she prayed in Hebrew to him. And I guess that's as short as possible of the story I can give.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Would you, if I gave you a different explanation to explore, would you look into it?
I mean, of course, there's plenty of explanations that you could explore. But
yeah, like
I call this, it was in the pursuit of truth. And necessarily, even with your explanation, neither one of us will know the truth.
Well, but we can evaluate what could be possible. So the thing is when it comes to the power of the mind, when it comes to pain management, there's tons of evidence for people even taking placebos and having those placebos be very effective in pain management. And those things have been seen in lots of other things that aren't just praying in Hebrew. It could be in other religions, or it could be in really kind of weird alternative medicines, right? There are people who believe that you can do acupuncture for pain management and that you could take essential oils or...
Right, and there's this interesting study that said that while going for acupuncture did help with pain management, it wasn't where the needles were placed like they said. It was the human touch and the attendance of another person that gave you some relief. Yeah. So here's the thing, though. Here's the thing that I
well, it's a known phenomenon is all I wanted to get out.
But I don't even want to go that far, right? We don't even need to go that far here. What we can say is, Jonathan, I accept on the face of it, just, okay, this happened exactly as you say it did. In that case, if we are going to pull something we have not substantiated to be true or existent as a cause, then we are also allowed to pull every single possible cause we can think of, right? It's either a natural phenomenon that can be described by medicine or God. It's this, it's that. It's also pixies. It's also unicorns. It's also whatever you want to bring into the equation, right? And so the issue here is that we're making a false dichotomy, right? We're saying it's either God or it's something natural. And it could be a whole host of natural things that we don't know, and it could be a whole host of supernatural things, right? And so, yes, I'm seeing how this sounds like it helps your case, but to me, it sounds very much like that cat crossing the street. Something interesting happened, but we have to make that leap to get to the cause that we're saying it substantiates.
Otherwise, we wind up again with post hoc, ergo propter hoc.
Right.
Right, and I understand, but remember in the start of the conversation, it was about weak and strong evidence. So this is just one example of weak evidence that has kind of given him a sway. Because my understanding...
Here's an interesting thing that I think a lot of people get confused about, and this is not just like a theist thing, this is across the board. A lot of weak evidence does not equal strong evidence, right? You can have a whole bunch of really weak evidence and still have a weak assertion, right? If all of your evidence individually can be dismissed or thrown into doubt, then you don't have a strong case. It doesn't matter how many of those are piled on top of each other. It just doesn't.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, the whole point of finding a conclusion is to be able to find something without reasonable doubt. Even though you may be able to doubt the conclusion, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't make a conclusion based off the fact. So
no, you can, but it would be a weak conclusion.
Right, but would you invalidate somebody's weak conclusion even though it was weak? Would you?
I would not invalidate it, but I would say this is too weak to convince me. Come with something else. And until then, I don't know.
And also, it's not meant to convince the other person. It's meant to convince the person who's having the evidence. So it's almost like I can tell you this story about my friend, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to convince you. The experience is the one that it convinces my friend who had the evidence. So
no, but here's the thing. I'm talking to your friend now. I'm not talking as V. If I were your friend and I got a whole bunch of evidence that was weak and then was given a weak conclusion, I would say, you know what? This is an interesting conversation. This is something I'm going to need to think more about. But right now, I do not have a sufficient answer because the evidence is weak and the conclusion is weak. So I'm going to sit on it. And it sounds like that's kind of what your friend is doing, right? They're still questioning. They're still on that, maybe, maybe not. And that's good. And that's good. And that's where they should stay until something convinces them. But my point here is that...
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, my point is that this is...
I agree with you 100%.
Okay.
So why are you convinced?
Yeah, that becomes the next question.
Yeah, because it sounds like, and I just want to make sure that I'm clarifying this so that we're on the same page here. It sounds like you were saying that kind of evidence should be convincing to the person who experienced it. And the problem there is we need to see if our experiences match reality, right? You could have had a psychotic break. You could have seen seeing visual and auditory hallucinations happen. When you're tired, when you're malnourished, those things happen for a host of reasons. And a lot of them, we never really find out why. Also, there are people who have different disorders. If you're schizophrenic, you're going to be experiencing those things. Now, I don't think that the experiences of a schizophrenic, when it comes to imagined people and sounds, that should be convincing evidence for them, which means that what they need to do is they need to compare that to reality. They need to call in other people so that they can start building that understanding of the shared world that they're in. When you're talking about people who are just, I had this very convincing experience and I experienced a miracle. Well, we're not going to argue. I mean, sure, okay, that's what you're saying, but does it match reality? Because there are people who say that they are the next incarnation of Jesus Christ, that are alive today, right? There are people who think that they're Elvis. I wouldn't want them to trust their experience either.
Eric. But Eric, you got to understand something. What you're saying is what contorts to reality, but to the person who's having that experience, that is their reality. So
no.
Well, yeah,
no, you don't. You do not get the right to your own personal reality. We share it, buddy.
You can have an experience, and that experience is real, but the conclusions you draw from that experience have to be grounded in a shared reality, or else they're useless in conversation or in interacting with other people. I can have an experience that is far out there. Like a lot of people who do DMT call in and they're like, hey, I had this experience while I was super fucking high, and now I understand the universe. And we say, you know what? I believe you. You had this experience. It sounds like it was transformative and amazing and world-shattering. That's awesome. I don't doubt that that was your real experience, but you cannot draw a conclusion about reality from that experience, right? Those are two different things.
Right. Right. And for that person giving you the experience, it would be based on the trust level of the person that you have. So, example,
no, there are strangers who call in all the time and say, hey, I had this experience. And I'm like, cool, awesome. I trust you that you had that experience. There is nothing about that I will debate. When you draw conclusions about reality from that experience, no matter how much I trust you as a person, as an honest interlocutor, that doesn't matter to me. It's not a rational course of action to draw conclusions about reality from experience in that way.
Yeah, but but the level of trust that you have in that person will help you understand the level of trust you have in their conclusion. So,
no, absolutely not. There is no correlation.
And also, just to be very clear, Jonathan, no, it's okay. Just to be very, very clear, when it comes to this show, we are operating on the principle that the people who are calling are honest interlocutors. Yeah. So we're not like...
But here's the thing. Yeah. I trust Eric a lot, like more than most people. Eric could come to me tomorrow and say, hey, V, I had a dream that I was driving a red Ferrari, and I think that means that tomorrow I'm going to get a red Ferrari. I just think that's how the universe works now. It doesn't matter how much I trust Eric to be a good person or an honest person. I believe he had the dream. I believe he's honestly convinced of this. I'm not convinced that that's the reality, right? It has nothing to do with how much I trust him.
That would be weak evidence, correct?
Right. It would be very weak evidence.
Exactly. So I agree with you on that because it's weak evidence. But what I'm trying to explain to you is that even though you may have weak evidence for something, you cannot draw on a conclusion that may contort to reality, correct?
You can, yeah.
Given multiple instances that may necessarily distort your reality. Like, I'll give an example. I understand that both of y'all are non-believers. If Jesus Christ appeared to you in a dream, you may not believe it. But if he did that for 100 days straight and everything that he spoke to you ended up coming true, and you're the only one who has that experience in order to validate it, it may change your desire and actually change what you believe. So it doesn't necessarily correlate to say, oh, I had a dream of a red Ferrari, but say, I mean, kind of a weak evidence on that end, but say Jesus continues to present himself to you and continues to present himself to you. I mean, the more he does it, I guess the more you could validate that evidence. But it happens one time, you could say that's only weak evidence. It only happened once. But
so here's the thing. If we followed that woman around who you brought into the story earlier, the woman who prayed in Hebrew and healed the guy's pain, allegedly, if we followed her around and saw her do that to everybody of every kind of illness repeatedly over and over, she went to a hospital and she went and just saved a bunch of kids with cancer, then yeah, I would say there is definitely something up with that woman. I don't know what it is, but there is something happening here that I do not understand, that we do not understand yet. We need to do more research here.
It would be illogical, correct?
And also,
no, it wouldn't be illogical. Illogical is something completely different. I think we need to retire that word.
Does not contort to explanation, right? I mean,
it would not fit in with our current known understanding of the material universe.
But it would be a phenomenon that we would need to go, okay,
but we would say it was happening, absolutely. But that's replicable evidence. It's not, hey, this thing happened to me, and then this completely unrelated thing happened to me, and this completely unrelated thing happened. Those three things are not repeating anything. They're separate events that your brain is connecting because you're looking for a conclusion, right? We have to make sure we're saying we're being very meticulous in how we're using the term replicable. We can do one thing 100 times, and that's repeating the experiment when you do that one thing. But having different disparate experiences in different ways that come to different conclusions, those are not repeated events. Those are individual events that your brain, which is built to categorize and to put things in boxes and to find stories, is connecting the dots for you.
You kind of gave me a little bit of a revelation about you. And that revelation is that your example is almost like first century examples of Christ. You know, like you said, if this lady healed all these people and touched all these children and continued to redo it, and she claimed that the reason she had this power was from God, not necessarily, even you like you just explained, you don't necessarily say, you said, yes, there's a phenomenon happening, but you don't necessarily say that this is from God. You can't necessarily prove it because this is only what the lady is saying.
Right. We know something's happening.
Honestly, that was a revelation, because it says to me that even those people who witnessed those experiences that Jesus Christ was claimed to have done in the New Testament and also in the Gospels and whatnot, that there were people out there who said, this is just a phenomenon, I can't explain it, but I'm not going to attribute it to God. So it almost seems like you are better at explaining reality of what people experience and why there is a slight denial of the experience, which kind of makes me feel as if it makes the gospel story more true now.
No. So let me go from this. So when it's all in the same book, it's not prophecy, it's foreshadowing.
But it's not all in the same book. It's not.
Is it collected in the Bible?
Separate books. Yeah, but just because you have an encyclopedia doesn't mean that all the books are from the same person.
So we have. Do you even know who wrote the books in the Bible?
Correct.
Are like I think what you should be evaluating is
certain people. I mean, we do have idea of certain people who've written the books in the Bible.
Some of the books in the Bible. We do not know all of the authors of the Bible. We don't have any idea of credibility or what their experience were. We just know that this is a story. Now, I actually want to dive into how this is interacting with you, though, because we're going a little wide, but I really want to dive in here. And that is, let's use the example of a vaccine. So,
ooh, timely.
Yeah. So when we are testing a vaccine, we want to find out that vaccine is, number one, not damaging people. And number two, is doing better than a placebo. And so we're going to do clinical trials to find out whether or not it does better than nothing at all, right? Or does better than a sugar pill. And so when we're testing this prayer example, number one, we're going to be seeing if it does better than any other proposed example, right? Different healing techniques or whatever in what alternative medicine they call it. So what you want to do is, that's how you check it. The thing that confuses me is I would want that for a vaccine before I took it. Wouldn't you want that for your God, at least, to check to see, is this power of prayer example better than a placebo?
Okay, so with your example of you do believe the placebo effect is real, correct?
Yes. It's an observed phenomenon.
Placebo is a sugar. Yeah, I know it's a weird phenomenon, but the placebo effect is a sugar pill. Could you not classify prayer in the same category? Because
absolutely you could.
Make it right.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
You necessarily cannot. Yeah, and I agree with you. You can absolutely say that prayer could be in the same category, but you cannot necessarily rule out that it wasn't the power of prayer, even though it could have just been a placebo, because we can't determine, because none of us have the power to control God.
So exactly. And here's the thing. We cannot determine. None of us have the ability to. So the correct answer is, I don't know what happened. Not, I'm going to run with a conclusion, because there's no way of knowing whether it's true or not.
Right. And I agree with you in this example with the placebo. But what I don't agree with you is the example with I agree with you with the example.
So in this example, though, you're taking the vaccine without even determining whether or not it's better than a sugar pill. What we're saying is that's a bad idea.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying obviously the vaccine has trials and everything like that.
Okay, do you have trials for the power of prayer like that?
But you do have you can test God. I mean, it's not like you can't. You can test God. You can do it. It's not like you can't. Like
okay, and what would the evidence bear out? Because I think you know exactly as well as I do that the evidence does not bear out that there's a power of prayer that is any better than a placebo effect.
In fact, it can be detrimental.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, but that when we use the power of prayer, we just agreed upon the fact that we cannot determine whether it was prayer or whether it was a placebo. We can't. We can't deduce that because we do not know. Like B said, I do not know, you do not know. But you can test the claims in the Bible if they're true or not, based off of how you experience them with your life.
No.
Jesus.
No, hold on. No, if I go to the pool tomorrow, that doesn't mean that V had a sandwich last week. That is a non sequitur.
No,
right? What you experience in your life is not evidence for a claim in the Bible. No.
Wait, no, I'm saying can you not test the claims that the Bible says? Like the claims that they say for you specifically?
What do they say for me specifically?
Well, do you mean like the handling snakes and drinking poison stuff?
If you look at Ecclesiastics, if you look at Proverbs, you look at Ecclesiastics, if you look at like the Gospels.
I guarantee you that the writers of Ecclesiastes and Proverbs were not thinking about people 2,000 years into the future, especially not me specifically.
Well, I know they weren't thinking about people in the future, but they were thinking about people in general, because the same issues that are presented in the Bible are the same issues we deal with today. Like, they haven't changed.
I'm pretty sure we don't have slaves.
No, we still do, unfortunately. Here's the thing, though.
There are still slaves in the world.
Here's the thing.
I mean, there are still slaves in the world. We know that.
I'm talking about like where we are right now in the United States.
Okay.
Oh, fair enough. Go ahead.
Here's the thing, Jonathan. Here's the thing, and then we're going to have to let you go for this call. But this is very interesting. I would love for you to call back. My issue here is that if you build your life around a book, if you read a book and expect it to be replicated in your life in some way, if you expect to find value in it, you will. You will find value in it. I read The Lord of the Rings 6 times between the ages of 12 and 18. 6 times. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing in my life that there was not a passage in Lord of the Rings that could back it up, right? I was having a bad day. I wanted to complain, and I was like, you know what? The hobbits didn't fucking complain while they were in the Emyn Muil with Gollum. There is no way that I'm going to complain right now. And it worked. It gave me peace. It gave me the motivation to continue. But I'm not using that to prove that the hobbits existed, right? It's a great tactic. I think if you pick the right book, if you pick the right thing to base a life on, that's really awesome sometimes. You have to pick the right thing, but it's really, really helpful. That has no bearing on whether or not the thing itself is true.
Well, I don't think that the book is what determines the truth of it, to be honest with you. I don't think that because you read the book, it guarantees it to be true. But what I do base it off of, the truth is how the examples in the books based off the flaws of our lives. Like it clearly does show how people are pretty bad in this day and in the past, and how this book and the words can influence your life to become better. Now,
no. Westboro Baptist Church, no. How about the church that I was a part of that kicked families out because they didn't match purity tests? No. The vast justifications of spousal abuse, no. But see, here's the thing: is it is not even benign. There are so many things that people use in the Bible to justify bigotry and violence that it is not only neutral, it is bad for you. You got to have good reason to pick up something that's bad for you like that.
I know, but did Christ justify those things? Because if people
Christ said, why would I throw my pearls before swine? Why would I waste my talents on somebody who's not part of my tribe? Jesus Christ said, sell your cloak and buy a sword.
Casting your pearls before swine is when you give an experience of your own life that may have been uplifting, and watching people who are only meant to deteriorate and pull down on you.
I think you need to read it in the Bible, dude. Check it out in its context. His specific reason for bringing it up is because she was not.
But I understand what you're saying. But example is me giving the experience of my friend. I mean, V did say it was allegedly, so she didn't really have much trust in the experience that I gave. Okay. And, that's kind of like passing my pearls before swine. Not calling you a swine, V. I'm just saying that I've
been called much worse by theists and atheists.
Yeah, but that said, we are like halfway through the show.
Yeah, we need to move on.
We got to get a couple more callers in today.
But here, guys,
this has been fun.
Theists, this is what happened when you call in early. You get a full hour.
Yeah, Jonathan, thank you for calling in.
Thanks for calling in, Jonathan.
May I say one last thing?
Sure, go for it.
One last thing.
Yep.
I just wanted to say thank you for letting me speak with y'all. And like I said, V, I would never discredit you as a person because you're made in the same image as me.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'll take that in the spirit it's meant.
Take it easy, man.
Bye.
All right. You have a nice day.